1, 2. Good evening, ladies and gents. If anyone's listening, just getting set up here, making sure the audio's okay. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm just checking my audio on YouTube here as well before I get started. I'm aware there's no video. Just checking mic and live stuff. I've got to make sure everything's good before we get rolling. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, that will do. 1, 2, 1, 2, check, check. And we are live. So going out live on YouTube and X. Anyone listening, this is Emmett, the host of the Resolving Reality podcast and the author of the book Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. Going live shortly with part 2 of my presentation on Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. So I'm just using vMix here, so I'm going to restart that, which you did notice, and I'm going to swap to this screen here. Just making sure you've got my desktop here before we get cracking. Should be a load of crazy screens on the screen. Oh, X is a little bit slow. Why is that? Oh, there we go. Great. Now I'm going to go minimize this. You should see the presentation screen from current slide. And we should have the presentation screen. Oh, wrong button. How could I do that? Wrong one. We don't want that. We want this one, where you can see me on the screen. There we go. We'll get rid of that title because we don't need that. You've got me on the screen. Now we should have desktop. Should be me in the presentation, and we'll get rolling now shortly. That's it, and then we'll go full screen from current slide. It's always the way. Tech stuff, new setup. Only got a couple of laptops here, so trying to making it work. Now I'm going to go full screen on my laptop. That looks okay, res-wise. So anyone watching back, welcome. I'm just going to go over my presentation and one more check before I get started. I don't want to lose this. Hopefully I'm only going to do this once. Yeah, so we're back to the desktop. And what I'll do is introduce this properly before I get moving. Right, so welcome folks, anybody watching back. Thanks for checking this video out. So for anyone who didn't know, I did a presentation at the University of Dallas on Thursday, 21st of November about my work, Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. It was it went on for about, it's the pinned tweet in my profile. It's also one of the recent upload videos on my YouTube as well. So it went on for about 45 minutes plus Q&A afterwards, which went through a lot of the basic principles of this very serious global problem. You really have to watch the first one to really appreciate this presentation. This is pretty much the other slides that I didn't use the first time around, and some other concepts thrown in as well. So I just spent a bit of time today just editing that, making it look reasonably presentable. So I could show you all the other things that I left out of that presentation. I mean, it's such a huge subject, but also so important and potentially multifaceted and potentially confusing as well. So I try to present this information in easy to read or easy to absorb style in these presentations for people who don't won't get around to reading the book, or who are too lazy to read books, or just not into books. So these presentations will go some of the way to fix that, hopefully, to get more people in. And I'm hoping that you'll all share this video around. So I'm just kind of deliberately taking my time here in case more people are willing to join or whatever. Right, so I will go straight into, I'm going to switch my views. Where am I going here? Right, and I'll go presentation. Looking at my output here from current slides. So this is the most important thing. If you really want to help what's going on in the world, put some energy into learning this, would you? Do everybody a favor, do yourself a favor, and study into this. You won't look at the world the same way again after learning about this subject. I can guarantee you that much. I was this turned things around for me in a big way. Okay, I think the quality is pretty good. It's just the resolution on playback. I was monitoring on a second laptop. Right, so you should have me in the bottom corner of the screen, presentation main screen. That'll do. And we're ready to rock and roll. Right, so here's part 2 of my presentation on Marxism, and you can see my book there, Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. It's on sale in 5 different languages, English, Spanish, French, Italian, and German. I'm trying to get it done in Portuguese as well, so I've got some Brazilian friends who'd be interested in that version too. And you can see in the cover of the book a lot of the things we've been dealing with over the years. Starting in the top left, COVID and the legalization of drugs, the United Nations, European Union, communism, the left, Black Lives Matter, feminism. You can see the plate with the leaf on it, veganism, the planetary health diet. You can see the boat people, or mass, that represents mass immigration. Below that, you've got a pregnant female. So the lower birth rates and abortion are connected with this issue. Over on the left hand side, you can see the trans symbol mixed with the Soviet symbol, trans ideology. You can see no families, the breakdown of the family unit, the education system, indoctrination, universities are all connected in with Marxism. A bit lower down, you can see the upside down cross, which is kind of Satanism, satanic symbol, or the destruction of Christianity. To the left of that is Mr. Karl Marx himself. Then you have the wind turbines represent the climate change movement. And you have to the right of that Vladimir Lenin. So we will move on from here then. So just a few quotes to get started. Now, I did originally had this presentation prepared for an American audience, but this is a global problem, and things apply. This stuff applies to all of us, particularly in Western countries, not just in America. But you can see these quotes here are kind of tailored for an American audience. So this is from the American Labor Union leader, George Meany. I quote, "The conflict between communism and freedom is the problem of our time. It overshadows all other problems. This conflict mirrors our age, its toils, its tensions, its troubles, and its tasks. On the outcome of this conflict depends the future of all mankind." Pretty dramatic, if you ask me. Next slide. This is from the FBI chief J. Edgar Hoover. This was in the Elks magazine, August 1956. I quote, "The menace of communism in this country," meaning the United States, "will remain a menace until the American people make themselves aware of the techniques of communism. The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could espouse a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent." And that guy was dealing with communism for a few decades in the States, so he knew exactly what he was talking about. Next slide. When we get ready to, by the way, if anyone's listening, just let me know if the audio is good. So a few people usually pop into YouTube. So if anyone joined, just let me know if the audio is coming through okay. So I'm not talking to myself here. There's some sort of dropout. Right, so here's a quote from Alexander Trachtenberg. He's the leading member of the Communist Party USA, and he said this at the National Convention Madison Square Gardens, 1944. Quote, "When we get ready to take the United States, we will not take it under the label of communism or the label of socialism. These labels are unpleasant to the American people. We will take the United States under the labels which we have made very lovable. We will take it under liberalism, under progressivism, under democracy." And this is particularly for my American friends. The Americans are still erroneously calling this liberalism. And as I always argue, how are you supposed to fix the problem if you're not even calling it by the correct name? So this is not liberalism, this is Marxism. I explained that in more detail in the book and in the previous presentation. This is not liberalism. So here is to add on to what happened in the last presentation, the various different initiatives are things that are affecting the world. The big issues that everybody's been talking about over the years: mass immigration, trans ideology, radical sex ed, hate crime, hate speech bills, all this crack are all different kind of initiatives being pushed by Marxism. Many of them are based on class struggle. And here's one of them, probably the big issue in Western countries at the moment, which is mass immigration. So here's some notes on that agenda and what it means, how it works. So in this equation, the migrants, so again, in case someone's watching this presentation first, which you shouldn't, Marxism is all about dividing people into groups and putting one in the oppressor class, one in the oppressed class. So one is kind of dominating or controlling the other one, or using the other one. So when it comes to mass immigration, migrants are the oppressed, and Western countries are the evil, white, capitalistic oppressors, right? And this links into the pathological altruism I talked about in the last presentation, the idea of trying to save other people or other countries or other ethnic groups at your own expense, essentially. Being nice, like taking more people onto the boat even though your boat is sinking, that kind of mentality, you know. So this sub-agenda is supported by cult members in governments, mainstream media, education, NGO, non-profit complex, the United Nations, European Union, etc. So it's not just at a local level or a state level, it's at a global level. All of these groups are ideologically on the same page, whether it's an activist in the street supporting this or someone at the top of the United Nations. They're all pretty much all one on this, pushing this agenda. So mass immigration is a type of economic attack on Western countries. It's a kind of overload. It does several different impacts, including overloading the welfare state. It puts pressure on services as well, and housing, obviously. So it can be construed as a kind of an economic attack on the West. It causes collapse and breakdown. And Marxism has always been very interested in attacking its old foes: capitalism, Christianity, culture, and the traditional family unit. So mass immigration is a way to destroy countries. It's a very easy, straightforward way of destroying countries, pretty much. This, particularly on an economic level. But it's also a form of attack in other ways as well. So it's a form of physical and social attack on the ordinarily resident populations of whichever country is affected. So in Ireland, I mean the Irish. In Sweden, I mean the Swedish. This agenda is sub-agenda is a form of physical social attack, right? Including crime, sexual crime, the clash of cultures, breakdown of law and order, and so on. It also this sub-agenda also accelerates the demographic changes. Eugenics is a big part of Marxism on a bigger picture level. The idea of producing certain types of individuals in society. A lot of this comes from the idea of the socialist man, the idea of creating new generations of people who will help the ideology proliferate. And it's a big subject, but that's why, as I mentioned there. So, you know, mass immigration combines with other sub-agendas or other Marxist initiatives on this issue, including feminism, abortion, trans ideology, veganism, etc. They're all connected in with the birth rates in one way or another. Just doing a little bit more monitoring here before I continue. One-man studio here. I'll just go to the next slide. Just checking if anyone's made any comments on that. Right. So if anyone's on X or YouTube and you're signed in there, just give us a comment, make sure everything's going okay, if you wouldn't mind. But really, I'm going to it's going to be obviously recorded, and I'm going to just pimp it out as usual. So here's the next one. Sub-agenda of feminism, right? So you can see the sign there, smash the patriarchy. So this sub-agenda is based on a lie. It's based on a lie that women, the oppressed in this equation, have suffered more historically than men, who are the oppressor, via this thing called patriarchy, which is a lie. A lot of Marxism is based on a lie. It's a distortion of the facts. It's a very binary, oversimplified way of viewing things. This is, of course, an attack on the... Okay, thanks for that. I'll just turn up the volume a little bit. Vanilla again, how's it going? You were right last time, so I trust you. I turned up a little bit there. Just make sure your volume's okay as well. I don't want it to come through too loud, too hot, or I'll start to clip. An echo on X as well. What is that? An echo. Okay, let me try and resolve that before I keep going here. Turn that off. I can hear a click. Let me know, is that better? I think I might have sorted out. I had to switch a couple of things off there. I can still hear my my audio coming through. Nice one, thank you very much. Appreciate that. You are my assistant. I'll send you a pint, glass of wine or something. Right, I'll go back in from that. Okay, so it should be full screen now. I'm just double checking my video here. Oh, okay, nice one, thanks for that. Too many buttons. This vMix is brilliant. Takes a bit of a learning curve with it. Alright, so I'll go back to that slide. So this is so the sub-agenda of feminism again is an attack on the traditional heterosexual nuclear family unit. Again, accelerates the demographic changes, eugenics, by, it's brought in contraception and normalize that. It's also brought in abortion, normalize that as well. And you can see the abortion figures for Ireland the last few years, particularly since 2018, have been incrementally increasing. Feminism has also generally encouraged motherhood much later in life, if at all. A lot of it's become more and more normal now to females not to have kids. Talking about healthy females who can have kids, it's becoming much more normal for them not to have children, whereas in the past it was perfectly normal for females to have kids, often in their late teens, early 20s. Some females still do, but the amount of them has dropped, and that's because of feminism. So feminism from that point of view is literally death for a people, and that's just feminism. Also, another interesting part of feminism is that it inflates the egos of the infected or affected females. It encourages, we'll expand more on that later on, it also encourages degeneracy or trashy behaviour through hedonism, so pleasure-related degeneracy. I don't know if anyone saw it, there was a video going around earlier on X of this female who had sex with 100 males in one day, and she was having a bit of an emotional breakdown. What a shocker. So this kind of degeneracy, remember, all comes from empowerment, right? It's empowering for a female to do what she wants and use her body how she wants. Also, another effect of this is that the ego is placed on a pedestal. So this is the idea that, the ego becomes, we'll expand on why that's the case later, but in the brainwashing, the ego is put on a pedestal and the person is, made to feel that they're a wonderful human being, often while having very little to any value at all. So I usually have a bunch of arseholes on the street next to me here. I won't bother talking over them, revving their engines and stuff. So this sub-agenda also empowers indoctrinated females into positions of authority and influence. And this is a thing that's been happening a lot the last few decades, and it has made a difference because there's no offense to females. Females are a little bit more prone to emotional indoctrination. And the ideology of Marxism, in a sense, it's in Marxism's interests to put more and more women into positions of authority. It's not only men that are pushing Marxism, of course. I'm just saying this is one of the effects of feminism. This is only a small part of what we're talking about. And feminism also has an important role in demoralizing the warrior class, which is the males. It's created this notion that men and women's opinions should be equal, even in times of war, which is now, which is not true. Men are more suited physically and psychologically to fight. That's been a feature of the human experience going back millennia. But in the recent decades, men have become more feminized because of Marxism. There has been a certain amount of feminization of men and a masculinization of females. So both of them are being pushed into roles that are not psychologically or physically suited to, thanks to the effects of Marxism. This has a demoralizing effect on the males and imbalances the females too. The end product is that nations are weaker for it and are unable to defend themselves, which is a major problem. Now, we've also got, I'm going to do just to make sure everything's all good here. Making sure I'm still coming through here. 1, 2, check. Just checking my audio. Where's my audio here? Is my audio still coming through? 1, 2, 1, 2. Yes. Okay. Right. So here's another one for you. The climate change movement. Thank you. Cheers, Vanilla. Appreciate it. So here is the climate change movement, right? So another Marxist sub-agenda. I won't be going through them all. Yes, Tommy, if you're listening, how's it going, man? I just got your message. I can't reply right now, but thanks for joining me. This is part 2 of my presentation. You can listen back to the start, but this is just the remaining slides that I didn't include in the first presentation, just to get the information out there. So it might be a little bit sloppy, but I don't really care. So in the climate change sub-agenda, love you too, man. Appreciate it. So the planet is oppressed in the climate change movement, right? So the poor planet is being oppressed by the oppressor. In this case, it's the polluting humans are the oppressor, the evil oppressors, right? So this particularly applies to opulent Western countries, right? So Western countries tend to be more prosperous. They have more technology. They have more cars, more economic output. So in particular, Western countries, you've noticed, are the enemy here. They're oppressing the poor planet, right? So the planet is being abused because of us capitalistic evil trash bags who have more than one car and so on, more than one vehicle. So it's basically a Marxist conspiracy theory that the world is going to end unless we reduce CO2 emissions and stop using fossil fuels. That's basically what the Marxist this climate change agenda is. It's all based on a lie, right? It's an attack on Western countries because there are billions spent on inefficient renewables, right? So this obviously doesn't apply to the new communist alliance countries. So new communist alliance like Russia, China, North Korea and their allies are not playing this climate game. They're not spending billions on these renewables. Only Western countries are. Now, where am I going with this? Well, it's a part of a kind of economic warfare on Western countries that a lot of people can't see because they don't understand the history of Marxism. If you're going to fight a war, you need a strong economy. So in my opinion, just to go straight to the core of this so I don't dance around the issue for you, I believe that this new communist alliance is preparing for a military invasion of the West. They've been planning this for decades and they are helping the West become psychologically and economically weaker before they make their move. And they're starting to make their move, but I don't knock myself off track here. So again, going green only applies to Western countries. This sub-agenda contains the DNA of the Cold War. Now, this is a big subject. I'll go more into the background later, but we're just focusing on the surface points for now. So the climate change movement contains DNA of the Cold War. So the communist countries wanted to hamper nuclear power development research in Western countries, including nuclear weapons. So that should be for obvious reasons. Why? We all know about the Cold War. We know there was different nuclear powers involved. So that was part of their agenda. A lot of this comes from the Cold War programming, that they wanted to make the West weak in terms of nuclear weapons. So, damaging. And there's three big Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the Fukushima Daiichi incident. I believe one of the 3 Mile Island, some researchers say that was sabotage, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. And also the Daiichi Fukushima incident, which we all heard about, was a tsunami apparently caused that. I think there might have been some Chinese involvement there, or I can't really prove it, but it would make sense. I go into more detail why in the book. But anyway, just to put it on the table, nuclear power is really the solution to our energy needs. It's clean. The new reactors can run off the spent fuel from the old reactors. So you can recycle the fuel, you see, and it's clean. Doesn't produce any pollution. Nuclear power plants can go 24/7, 365 days a year, whether it's sunny, dark, day, night, wherever it is in the world, and it's perfectly safe if it's done right. In France, over 80% of their power grid is nuclear. Germany dismantled their grid after the Fukushima incident. The German Greens, the lefties in Germany, said, oh no, that could happen to us. We can't risk that happening. Let's dismantle our nuclear power plants with the help of Merkel, who is a commie, of course. And they start to spend all the money on renewables and start to destroy their economy. I mean, how often do tidal waves hit Germany? Never, right? So, again, it's all just Marxist bullshit. Remember, Marxism either deliberately or accidentally likes to blow money. It likes to steal or likes to waste money any way it can, right? You want to keep these nut jobs away from everything in society, particularly economics. They are like kryptonite to economic prosperity. So, of course, the climate change movement is also a way of stealing via the carbon tax, and this also punishes industrial output. So again, attack on capitalism. What you're doing is you're trying to force that equity. You're punishing people for being successful, making money, generating profits. A lot of this comes from the twisted brain of Karl Marx and so on, and those before him, like Babeuf and stuff. But Marx made it more economic. They hate profits, they hate prosperity, and the carbon tax is typical Marxism. They punish you for being successful while they steal from you. So this sub-agenda also allows the cult to gain control of agriculture, including the food supply, right? So the planetary health diet, which the United Nations is pushing, veganism, United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. They're up to several different things there, but one of the things they're up to is this cult has a history of trying to get control of the food supply. They seem to have this obsession with starving people. And if you think of being dramatic, remember that Sadiq Khan, the Fabian socialist mayor of London, we'll talk about the Fabians later, was trying to encourage Londoners to get on the planetary health diet, which is a diet where you're on 40 grams of protein a day. Now, a healthy person, I weigh about 80 kilos, say, right? I should get a minimum of 8. You need 1 gram of protein per kilogram of your body weight per day. That's just for maintenance. If you're building muscle, it's 1.5, right? Or thereabouts if you're an athlete. So I should be getting 80 grams of protein a day. That's just protein. That's not anything else. They want you to live on 40 grams of protein a day. So that's rationing. Now, again, because these are commies, when they start talking about rationing and stuff, watch the fuck out, because you'll be starving before you know it. There's other reasons why they'll do that stuff as well. This is all under the pretense of saving the planet. Of course, this sub-agenda is also connected to the one of the Marxist initiatives of ESG, environmental social governance. I'll be breaking that down a little bit later on. It's just a way of controlling companies and forcing them to go along with Marxism, essentially. Again, there's eugenics undertones to the climate change movement. The literature from the Marxist globalist organizations like the Club of Rome and the United Nations, they state that human populations, particularly in the West, are too numerous for the Earth, right? So there's too many people. Now, if there's too many people, you need to cull them, don't you, like they're cattle. So, you know, when we talk about the Fabians and such later, a lot of these Marxist nutcases going back into history have this obsession with killing anyone who doesn't fit into their system, right? Again, this is all based on a lie, but this is the eugenics undertones. Now, of course, as I was talking last night on X about how important carbon dioxide is for life. And I'm sorry to take you into the chemistry here for a moment, but in a molecule of carbon dioxide, there's one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms, right? So when you breathe out CO2, mammals breathe out CO2. Most plants absorb that CO2 and they take the carbon atom but throw away the two oxygen atoms. And it goes out into the atmosphere. They use the carbon in photosynthesis to give themselves energy and growth and so on, combined with sunlight. Most plants. And we take in the oxygen. So there's a nice symbiosis there. So my point is that CO2 is as important for life as oxygen. If you start reducing CO2 to unnatural levels, again, we're back to the same shit I was talking about a moment ago. You've got lower crop yields, starvation, so on. You see where this is going. This, again, Marxism, again, remember, is anti-humanity. It's anti-nature. It's anti the creation. If you're religious, it's anti-God. It kills and causes destruction everywhere. So, as I pointed out there, it's death for the plants, ecosystems, people, etc., because we are all one on this planet in terms of the ecosystem and symbiosis. And again, Marxism likes to fuck around with the naturally occurring equilibrii, or equilibriums. So here we go. This is watermelon communism, right? So remember this one, right? You can have it. So the climate change movement is watermelon communism. It's green on the outside, commie red on the inside. It's just another manifestation of Marxism hidden as something else. So another wolf in sheep's clothing, right? So the planet itself is being oppressed. No, so whole fucking planets now are being oppressed. Think of the gargantuan egos involved here, where people think they can save entire planets. So as the American stand-up comedian said years ago, this planet has survived floods, ice ages, magnetic reversals of the poles, earthquakes, volcanoes and all that stuff. And these people think some CO2 and some plastic bags is going to trouble the planet. No, the planet is doing okay. As George Carlin said, the people are fucked. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Lanchuk. Well, I hope you're a sir. Jesus, don't offend you. Don't want to presume your gender. Welcome, by the way. Tommy, I hope you're still listening. So, yeah, comment if you're still listening, man. I'll show off a little bit. So here's the Club of Rome. Right, this is just another Marxist group. There's been many Marxist groups that have appeared in the 20th century. They're all about global this. Nice one, okay, good. Thank you, sir. Sir, thank you. So I said that to someone recently who was called Toby. And Toby was a female. And I was like, fucking hell, how the fuck was I supposed to know that? I only met one other Toby in my whole life, and it was a male, and I got that wrong. Nice one. Thank you, sir. Other sir. Thank you, Tommy. So anyway, here we go. The Club of Rome, right? This is one of the major groups involved in starting this climate change bullshit. It was founded in 1968 by the Italian cult member Aurelio Pecci and British scientist Alexander King. And this guy Pecci or whatever was definitely a Marxist for sure. The first formal meeting was 1970, Bern, Switzerland. According to some, the COR has kind of a think tank relationship with the United Nations. So these nut jobs come up with these ideas, right? So the COR website from the About Us page, quote, decades of exponential consumption, right, and population growth have come to imperil the Earth's climate and life-supporting systems while reinforcing social and economic inequalities, impoverishing billions globally. Now, even if you're a rookie with Marxism, please, I expect you to spot the clues here. Exponential consumption, so capitalism, materialism, economic inequalities, I shouldn't have to explain that, impoverishing billions globally. Thanks, Tommy. And so you can see all the Marxist cues here, right? Also, another part of their text said the limits of the Earth's biosphere were being reached, destabilizing the foundations of life as we know it. So that's a little bit fucking dramatic, isn't it? It's taking all these little sneaky little digs at capitalism, and it's basically saying that capitalism is going to get us all killed. That's fair enough to say, right? So towards the bottom, the COR wants us to act now to save the Earth, to move towards more equitable economic, finance, and socio-political models. So that's code for let's have a socialist planet, right? Now, again, it's my job. If this kills me, I'm going to educate people to the point where they read that middle paragraph and go, "That's Marxist bullshit. You can't fool me," right? That's the level of awareness we all need to be at if we want to destroy this movement. So here we go, and this is some of the big clues for me that this was Marxism, right? So this is from the cover of the First Global Revolution book. It shows the globe of the Earth with all the countries coloured commie red. This book was published in 1991 when the USSR collapsed, right? So it should be pretty obvious. All the countries red, right? And the word revolution. This is from the section of the book called The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man, page 115. Quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. These phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples." If you saw the first presentation, you should recognize that word. "All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself." Now, there's a few layers to that, but again, like I said, eugenics, because when you start thinking humanity is the enemy, you start talking about reducing the population. That's what the Bill Gates shit is all about. That's what population replacement is all about. That's what abortion, trans, feminism is all about. You can see it's all about eugenics. There's some people on the earth who are crazy and who think there's too many human beings and they needed to be culled like we're fucking animals, essentially. Another level to this as well is that there's a very satanic undertones here, which is that humanity is no good and it's evil. The humanity itself is bad for the earth. It's a very satanic notion that human beings, we were a mistake. Now, whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. You have to absorb the concept here, right? Some people are religious, so we have to cater to all of us, to everyone, right? So, but, you know, if you're religious, you clearly see the satanic undertones here that God made a mistake pretty much, right? Anyone still listening, just let me know if the audio is still good and everything's good, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going out live on X and on YouTube. Thanks for joining me, and you who joined late. This is part 2 of my presentation on Marxism and my book, Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. The first part of this presentation is doing really well, by the way. Thanks, Lamb Chop. It's received over like 40,000 views. It's up to 50,000 views, the first one. So far, mission accomplished, you know. There's 2 versions on X, by the way. One of them is the whole session, which was the presentation and the Q&A. It's about an hour, 40 minutes long. But I uploaded the second version with just the Q&A, which is 50 minutes. Now, nobody's too busy not to watch that video. I don't care who you are, what you're doing, where you're based right now. Nobody's too busy. They can't watch a 50-minute video. Please, just do it. Right, it will give you a lot of the weapons and materials to spread this message towards other people. So, thanks, Vanilla. So, the CORs, the Club of Rome's associated publications, include the anti-capitalism entitled Limits to Growth in 1972 and the more overtly Marxist publication, The First Global Revolution in 1991. Now, the Limits to Growth, one of the versions had the planet coloured green, so you probably wouldn't notice. But the one with the coloured red, the globe red, again, similar thing. But look at the words, Limits to Growth. That comes from the Communist Manifesto, when Karl Marx said that capitalism contained the seeds within itself to sow its own destruction, or words to that effect, pretty much. So they're obsessed with this idea that capitalism is bad and this can't continue. This is where a lot of their logic comes from, Okay, but this again, this is all Marxism. They always leave clues. You just have to know how to spot the clues, right? So these works and other materials endorsed by the COR include themes such as the notion of overpopulation and that human beings are problematic for the world, as I mentioned. The idea we've overindulged living in capitalistic societies, anti-capitalism. Also, that we need an international revolution. So it's an international global revolution. This is Trotskyite rhetoric. There's different types of Marxism, but he was one of the first figures to believe in the idea of having a global revolution. So it's called Trotskyite rhetoric. Okay, if you look at, say, the kind of bullshit that the United Nations come out with, people like Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and the new guy, Antonio Guterres, they all talk the same bullshit constantly about we need a global revolution to save the planet. We need a global revolution to save the women from being oppressed and all the domestic violence. We need a global revolution to save the animals and to make people eat bugs and leaves. Eating meat is evil. That's why they're trying to get control of the farmers and so on. I think you've all noticed that. Did you all hear about this Bovaer shit? Excuse the pun. They want to stop all the cow farts, right? Because they're killing the planet, all the methane from the cows. Do you ever hear of anything so fucking stupid? But a lot of it, again, is to get control of the food supply. Nations can't defend themselves if everybody's eating leaves. You need meats, animal fats, animal proteins, keep a nation strong. They keep the fertility rates up, and they allow people to physically fight and be physically strong. But I digress. So obviously the COR as well pushes the idea that all countries should be united, solidarity, to deal with these apparent environmental, biological, demographical problems, right? So it's all part of the same thing. It's a tradition in Marxism, the whole idea of one world government that goes right back into its history. So here's another sub-agenda, the LGBTQ trans thing, which has been in our faces for years now. You can't seem to walk down the street now in most cities in the summer without a crotch or someone wearing a fucking gimp mask or someone walking past you with a assless pants, and all this sort of degeneracy, people dressed up as dogs on their hands and knees and stuff. So we're pretty much approaching hell at this stage, I would say. Babylon, essentially, the breakdown of civilization. The LGBTQ people are oppressed by society, right? So the argument here is that, again, when someone's being oppressed, this is the revolutionary energy that makes people think we need to change society to accommodate them, right? So this notion includes including non-binary people, even though they represent only a small fraction of the population. So basically they're saying society needs to change to accommodate just a fraction of the population, that they're being oppressed somehow, So this is part of the Marxist strategy of activism and waves. There's always something more weird and extreme coming down the tracks with this thing. Yeah, that's another one. Good example. Yeah, the fall of Rome as well. Degeneracy equals destruction and collapse. Absolutely. So the attack on the traditional family, obviously LGBTQ trans is connected in with that. And also the whole idea of the government stepping in between the parents. So now governments have the excuse to take control of the kids with the social care and so on, where if kids are being oppressed by their parents, kids are being oppressed by their parents because their parents won't let them to change their gender when they're 12 years old, this government can step in. So it's connected with that too. Again, connected to eugenics because it sterilizes the youth through puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, and gender reassignment surgery. I actually did an interview with a guy called Dr. Quinton Van Meter in 2018, a very decent man who talked to me about this issue and really opened my eyes to the background to it and what's going on. And what you're doing is with trans, what you're doing is you're trying to treat mental problems with physical surgery. Not only is it satanic and stuff, it's just unprofessional bad medicine. It goes way beyond bad medicine and unprofessionalism into being downright evil. But essentially, it's just mental illness. Of course, this sub-agenda combines with feminism, abortion, mass immigration, veganism to reduce populations in affected Western countries. So remember, these are just ingredients in the mix. So mass immigration, trans, feminism, veganism, they all make little impacts on society and help to reduce the amount of mostly Caucasian people in Western countries. This also paves the way for further degeneracy, such as MAPs, or minor attracted persons, aka pedophiles. And you've all heard this, I'm sure, haven't you, where they've talked about this recently. So, you know, what they're doing is they're just gradually encroaching further and further on what you think is normal. And that's where other terms, they've invented these other terms like heteronormativity and so on, and cisgender. They come up with these terms to distort people's perceptions of reality. So it's revolution in waves. There you go. So I jumped ahead there. Sorry, so that's just from memory. So there you go. Heteronormativity and cisgender, to normalize the abnormal. That's essentially what they're trying to do. They're trying to convince you that what was normal before wasn't really normal, and all this reality distorting bullshit. It's also connected with Marxian postmodernism, which I'll touch on later a little bit. So this is pretty much the notion that a person can make up their own version of reality and identify as whatever they want. So if I tell you all tomorrow that I am the sexiest bastard in the world, or I am the reincarnate, I am the fucking king of the leprechauns in Ireland, and you all should bow down to me and give me all your fucking money, you have to respect my opinion, because that's what I believe, right? That's my truth, you see, and you all have to respect that. And if you don't respect my truth, you are oppressing me, and I can be as delusional as I want. That's why now we've got grown men walking around now, these ugly looking hairy armed Adam's apple, big jaw men walking around in high heels and makeup. You know, these freaks walking around the place, and we're supposed to respect their opinions. This is postmodernism. I can make up my own reality, basically. So essentially what it does is it normalizes delusion and insanity. That's what it does. It's normalizing psychopathic behavior. So I talked about the last presentation the importance of oppressor and oppressed, the whole class struggle concept. So some of the basics is there, but this is a bit more of going into a bit more detail on this. So one of the things that happens is the relationship becomes inverted, right? So again, it's based on a lie, but the oppressed becomes the oppressor, right? So an example of this would be, say, in feminism, the lie says that men have oppressed women, and it becomes justifiable now for women. So the idea that men have abused women, and now it's okay for women to abuse men. So the oppressed becomes the oppressor and gets revenge, essentially, right? So you see this pattern happening all across the West. It explains a lot of the things that have been happening, like, for example, the fact that immigrants coming into Western countries often come in with this murderous sentiment. Yeah, some of them are sociopaths, but there's that general hatred you see towards their hosts, which is really quite bizarre. That's coming from Marxism. Another example is the black on white crime in the States. A lot of black people have been brainwashed in America to think that they're the oppressed class, and that leads to this murderous attitude towards white people. In South Africa, you can see it to a very extreme degree with the murders happening there, the genocide essentially of white people. So because they become inverted, the oppressed class, right, because of the brainwashing, they also ironically become ungrateful and privileged, since criticism of those in the oppressed class is not permitted in a Marxist contaminated social environment. So you're not allowed to criticize somebody if they have oppressed status, because they're victims, you see. So with no one to keep them in check, this leads to ego inflation and the degeneration of behavior. So it becomes socially unacceptable to criticize females because of feminism, because it says that women have suffered so much, you're not allowed to make them suffer anymore. Then it becomes socially unacceptable to criticize females, and that's not a good thing. All of us in our lives, male and female, need to be kept in check in our lives so we don't get big heads and get big fucking egos. But it becomes, imagine me personally, imagine for a laugh here, imagine it became socially unacceptable to criticize heterosexual white Irish males. That puts me in the oppressed class all of a sudden, and if any of you say anything mean or use any hurty words towards me, you're a bad person, right? Even if I'm being an asshole and my behavior is unacceptable, you're not allowed to criticize me. That's bad, because I will continue to be an asshole. There's no reason for me to stop. And the ego gets bigger. And we see that constantly with people in oppressed groups. It makes them a little bit crazy in the head thanks to the brainwashing. So you see the behavior degenerates, it leads to ego inflation, which often leads to aggression as well. So because they feel that they're oppressed, they actually go on the attack and they want revenge. And this is all based on a lie, remember. So in South Africa now, there are people going around killing white farmers because they feel that white people are the enemy in Africa, which is a lie. So it's because of stuff like this. This is where the revolutionary element and division is created. It's emotional brainwashing, and a lot of it comes from revenge, essentially. So here's another part of the whole class struggle thing. It's another problem with it: the idea of false narratives and cherry picking. So the idea of creating false narratives and cherry picking to demonize the oppressor class or the target group, right? So an example of what I'm talking about is the idea that the white race is the worst race in the history of humanity. The white race engaged in slavery and oppressive imperialism more than any other racial group. Now that is an absolute lie. That is a despicable, racist, evil lie. That's no basis in reality at all. Zero. Right? Now, the only people who believe that to be the case are people who don't understand history, because all racial groups in the past engaged in slavery and murder towards their own people. Even the idea that white people did it more than others isn't not true at all. And I mentioned in the book, you had slavery in Central America with the Mayans and the Incans. The Incas, the North American Indian tribes, butchered and took each other as slaves and sexual slaves. All across Africa, I mean, certain parts of Africa nowadays, they'll still eat you. They've been killing each other going back millennia, long before the Buddha people arrived in South Africa. They've been killing each other, and that goes for all other racial groups and ethnic groups as well. So it's a complete lie, and it's nonsense. And you've heard the terms in America, and when Marxism becomes more widespread in society, you hear these terms of white privilege and white people are disease. That is racism. That's essentially what that is. It's racist incendiary language. It's all based on a lie in order to attack the oppressor, right? So this generates hatred towards the oppressor, which then leads to attacks and eventually murder and genocide. And I mentioned South Africa again is a very extreme example of what happens when Marxism is now in the driving seat. You've got a majority black government, thanks to the African National Council in South Africa after apartheid. Since then, it's just been gradual incremental hatred and murder. Now white people in South Africa, despite the fact they actually built the place, are now the inferior class, and the country's going to hell. And the black people who are brainwashed in Marxism are literally killing the only people who could fix their society. So let me now actually, here's a simple graph I put together about class struggle. Now this, to my analysis, is right to the core of why the world is going to hell. It's the class struggle brainwashing and the emotional reactions it produces in people. I put this in the book, but it's far deep into the book. I don't know if many people have gotten that far. I'm waiting for somebody who's read the book to contact me and say, my God, man, you nailed it. Because that's it. This is it. This is why half the planet is crazy, okay? So let me lay out some of the details here. In the class struggle concept, like I said, you've got the oppressor and the oppressed. So another way of saying the oppressor is the controller, dominator, perpetrator, user, master. The oppressed, the controlled, dominated, victim, used, slave, etc. Okay, so clearly there's a dichotomy going on here. And you can see the top right and top left, you can see the emojis, right? So the oppressor, that's supposed to be angry, but that's the best image I could find. And oppressed is obviously sad, right? So in the next image, this is basically what it does to people's brains. So the oppressor on the left Again, to use feminism as an example, according to feminist propaganda, the males are bad and you should hate them, right? The oppressor deserves your hatred, judgment, ostracization, all the so-called masculine emotions, right? In other words, hate. So you hate the oppressor, okay? The oppressed, the victim in the equation, you should have all the feminine, soft emotions like sympathy, empathy, compassion, and so on. The so-called feminine emotions. Now, this has nothing to do with male and female, right? Men and women can both express feminine and masculine emotions. I'm not picking just on women here. Please don't react that way. I'm talking about the brainwashing. We all have masculine and feminine emotions, right? And we use them in different scenarios. But this brainwashing, it makes the person's brain split into these two areas where you've got hatred for the oppressor and love for the oppressed. And I say love because it's not really love. Because when you treat someone as being a victim and you treat them as being oppressed, and it's all about treating them perhaps too well just because of the group they belong to, that's not love. You're actually doing them a disservice. That's not love. Love is not making somebody weak and disempowering them. That's not love. That's part of the lie of Marxism. This is not actually love. It's actually destroying. So when you put someone in the oppressed class, you're actually disempowering them, not empowering them. This is right to the core of the issue. And actually, I'll go back one moment. Before I continue, the reason I think I'm the only one that I know of, the only analyst on the subject that I know of in the world who spotted this, because by accident I've discovered it because of some of my other knowledge bases. I wasn't always interested in politics and geopolitics. When I was younger, I was interested in things like spirituality, alternative belief systems, the occult, and so on. And one of the concepts I heard in the occult, and this is the kind of an addendum to this slide here, is that this is a concept. Now, I don't like going into that stuff too much because a lot of people aren't interested in it and they get impatient, but let me just put this on the table for you, right? My back is a bit sore here. Basically, there's an idea in the occult about mind control, that one of the best ways to control someone's mind is to traumatize them, to discombobulate them, to make them unsettled in an extreme way. And one way to do that is to get a person's, force their consciousness, their mind into a lower level of function. Okay? So, I mean, as in not in control, not calm, not lucid, not conscious, not aware. Force them down into a lower level. And what's an easy way of doing that? Get them emotionally charged, particularly conflicting emotions. And to use an example of what I'm talking about, yeah, in a sense, yeah, a split. But let's not go into that quite. I'm just talking about emotions. But in a sense, it does kind of split the personality, but not in the conventional sense. But good point, thank you. It causes a split in emotional states. And they're very extreme contrasting emotions, as you can see, hate and love simultaneously. I'll give you an example. If anyone's ever gone through a really bad breakup, and I've been through quite a lot, where you're in that phase where you still love the person, but you think you hate them, it's horrible. You're all over the place. You're not in control at all. That's a good example of what I'm talking about. And a lot of people can relate to that, particularly if you've been through a few relationships. If you're a really lucid person like me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's quite traumatic. You're not in control. And that's what I noticed by accident, because of my knowledge of the occult from my youth. This concept of class struggle brainwashes people and actually does that to their brains. Now that is, for me, the best explanation why half the planet's crazy with this shit. I haven't heard anybody explain it in this way yet, and I think I'm right. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I'm the only one who's put that out. It's just a theory, but you're not going to get that kind of analysis from a conventional psychologist, because they don't have any knowledge about the occult. So how would they know? I'm sure they have their own theories, but I thought I'd mention that one. Maybe I'll be proven right in time, but we have to explain why the indoctrination is so potent. This is certainly one of the factors, and there's others as well, but I will move on to another area here, so moving to some other concepts. If anyone's listening, by the way, on X, if you wouldn't mind retweeting this live, if you wouldn't mind, I'll have the video version. I'll be pimping that out as usual. I'm going to put that in the tweet of the original video. So anyone who doesn't know, if you go to my, if you're on YouTube, you can see the part 1 presentation, Dallas presentation, and my videos. If you're on X, go to my pinned tweet, has part 1 there, and I'm going to put this version in that thread so people can see it, hopefully. Because as I was saying before, 45 minutes is barely enough to scratch the surface of this ideology. So now here's the concept of equality and equity, and this has become, you hear a lot of talk about this nowadays, and I didn't have didn't have the time to fit this into the original presentation. So what is this? You hear them using these words, right? Equality and equity. So you know you're dealing with a Marxist when they bring up these concepts. So basically, here's a quote from, I just grabbed this from some random website. So, equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity, on the other hand, recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So this is basically Marxism trying to create artificial equality, uniformity, even where none exists. So there's the natural order. Marxism wants to fuck it up as usual based on this crazy idea. And you can see the image at the bottom. You can see equality on the left, equity on the right. And you can see in the case of equity, you know, their different attributes, in this case their height, are being compensated for by these little platforms to make them all equal. So it's an intervention to create this artificial outcome. Since Marxism, the cult of Marxism, or the ideology, attempts to eradicate oppression, it considers hierarchies unethical. You know, it wants to eliminate class distinction. So it doesn't like hierarchies, because if someone's higher than someone else, the person in the lower position must obviously be being oppressed somehow. So Marxism is obsessed with this idea of trying to destroy, get rid of oppression whenever it can. Marxism also denies the differences between races and cultures. Also, you know, it pushes the idea that, you know, sex and social status as well. It's always trying to deny the difference between races, cultures, sexual orientation, so on, and gender is a social construct, all that bullshit. The ideology also has a tendency to destroy anything positive in society, including brilliance, achievement, so on, prosperity or excellence. And these are the things that allow civilization to exist and prosper. It is also decided anti-nature. You know, Marxism is against nature. It's against the way things naturally work, and it's against hierarchies, naturally occurring hierarchies. So Marxism, basically, to achieve all of that, to push its will on everything, it uses the concept of equity, which is compensating for the differences between these groups to produce an artificial equality of outcome. So it compensates for the differences between groups or individuals, whatever the scenario it is. It tries to force them all equal, even though they're not equal. That obviously means that whoever's in a higher position needs to be pulled down, and whoever's in a lower position needs to be pushed up. Right? So this is tampering with the naturally occurring dynamics or inequality in society produces destructive effects. What a shocker, as the history of the ideology shows us. So if you mess around with nature, so I'll go back to that slide. So you mess around with nature, it's always destructive. Things are the way they are for a reason, and Marxism has a tendency of tampering around with these dynamics. And think of it this way. When the person who deserves to be here, right, is brought down, it's demoralizing, right? You take away their incentive for being successful, wealthy, ingenious, efficient, etc., whatever. And this person here who is lower is being brought up, and they're both treated equal when they're not. The one in the lower position is being brought up when they don't deserve to be. Perhaps maybe they're lazy. Maybe they don't have the attributes to put them there. That's why we have the problem nowadays of so it's demoralizing for the achiever, and the underachiever is being elevated. So again, this one might develop an ego, right, when they shouldn't have one, and this one here is being demoralized. It's incredibly destructive for the fabric of society. And in recent times, you've all seen the famous DEI hires. We'll get to DEI in a moment, but people being put into positions of authority when they don't deserve to be, when they don't have any skills. They're being put into positions of authority because they might be gay or black or trans or whatever. They're not in there on their merits. They're in there because of the social group they belong to. So here's DEI, right? So another Marxian initiative being pushed in government, industry, in the corporate world, etc. So diversity, and traditionally in Marxism, is this idea of there's too much homogeneity. There needs to be more of a mix. So really that's code for there's too many white people, particularly heterosexual white males, right? Because remember, heterosexual white males are the evil business owners, the oppressors, right? The heterosexual white males are the ones who oppress women in the patriarchy. Heterosexual white males are the ones who led to all the imperialism around the world, right? Heterosexual white males are the worst. That's why, like I said in the first presentation, this is the only type of human being who's not allowed to be oppressed, who's not allowed in the oppressed class. So people like myself are shit out of luck. We're not allowed to be in the oppressed class. So we are the enemy. And one of the things diversity does is take in every corporate situation and so on, in the past, they used to be all heterosexual white males. Now it's anything but that. That's diversity, right? So part of diversity too is to put basically those from the oppressed groups into positions of power and influence, which again helps Marxism, doesn't it? Because they're more like, say, a Leo Varadkar in Ireland, right? He's what is he again? He's half Irish, half Indian, and 100% gay, right? So he's in a position of authority and influence. He's more likely to support Marxism and Marxist agendas because he's from an oppressed category, right? Now, you've also got equity. So like we just talked about, the idea to compensate for the naturally occurring differences between individuals and groups. And the third one, inclusion, drag as many people into the collective as possible as a form of coercion. You have to go along with the ideology or else. Pull everybody in there. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. The effects of this Marxist initiative, of course, include the cult gains more control. Economic collapse as well is another one, because again, you're destroying the fabric of society. It leads to economic collapse, which is very Marxist. And it's also an attack on excellence and achievement. Marxism seems to like to attack anything beautiful in our world, just as a matter of course. You've also got ESG, environmental social governance, which is another Marxian initiative being pushed in government, industry, the corporate world, etc. It's connected with the climate change movement, like I said. It's a way of coercing organizations, corporations, etc. to make sure they support Marxism by giving them an ESG score or rating, right? So if they're not going green, for example, advocating climate change movement, their ESG score will be affected. So you're being punished for not going along with Marxism. That's all it is. Now look at the symbols on the right there. It doesn't look very Marxist, does it? But when you see the environment, okay, climate change movement, sure. Social, yeah, could possibly be Marxist governance. Well, that's just power. The rookie, a person with no knowledge of Marxism, may not spot this is Marxist, looking at the kind of symbols and language that's being used. The effects, again, include the cult gains more control, economic collapse, and so on. So remember, a lot of this stuff is being pushed in Western countries, like the climate change agenda. So again, this is going outside the scope of this presentation. But remember, the Eastern countries, the new communist aligned countries, are not playing these games. This is really on Western countries, again, to cause economic collapse and weakness. So here's another example of another Marxist concept, right, that's hidden. It's in the Irish education system. You can see it on the left, SPHE, or Social Personal Health Education. So this is an initiative being introduced. Anyone listening, by the way, just let me know if you're still listening, and let me know if my audio is okay. I can't hear myself, so my voice probably sounds weird because I've got these plugs in, but they're not really working right now. So this is from the curriculum.ie website. So quote, learning in SPHE aims to help students to build self-awareness. Thanks, Vanilla. Thanks again. So learning in SPHE aims to, thank you, sir, I appreciate it. But 2 sirs, Tommy, sir, thank you. So learning in SPHE aims to help students to build self-awareness and positive self-worth. Oh my God. Develop the knowledge, understanding, skills, dispositions, and values that will support them to lead fulfilling and healthy lives. Isn't that lovely? Feeling empowered to create, nurture, and maintain respectful and loving relationships with self and others. Enhance their capacity to contribute positively to society. Now, this is not from the official documentation. I was too lazy to find that, but this is a reasonable overview here. So the effects of this obviously includes the cult. The Marxist cult itself increases its membership by brainwashing kids, right? So they're indoctrinating kids to become good little global citizens. That's why they're teaching climate change in the schools. That's why they're teaching trans. That's why they're getting the little kids used to drag queen story time. That's why they're brainwashing particularly teenagers with this idea of consent training, right, which is just coming from feminist propaganda, that all males are potential rapists. So young males need to be conditioned into this notion of consent. It's also connected in with mass immigration as well, but I don't want to go into that just now. But look at the symbology on that image to the left. Actually, the next slide, maybe I went full screen with that today. No, okay, sorry, I guessed wrong. I'll go back to that slide. Just wanted to show you something. So look at the symbology on the left, okay? So you have the person, you got the all-seeing eye, you got very symbology above there, and you got the Taoism, the yin-yang symbol of Taoism there. So a little bit occultic and a little bit creative. I haven't done a deep dive into that, but to the bottom right, actually, you can see it, the head with a light bulb inside it. That symbol's been used before. I think the New Statesman magazine used that on a few occasions, I think, which was created by the Fabian Society. We'll talk about the Fabians later, but it's the idea of being woke. You know, what Marxism is wokeness, right? You're an evolved being by being a good little global citizen, essentially. You know, it's part of a global awakening. That's where this woke stuff comes from. So in the first presentation, if you saw it, I talked a lot about Ireland and some of the evidence that Marxism was affecting Ireland. So here's a rundown of the NGO non-profit complex. So here's some of the Marxist groups in tiny little Ireland. This is the Republic of Ireland, remember, with a population of 5.38 million, approximately. Population Dublin is like 2 million or something, over 2 million, I can't remember, but it's a very small place. So you've got, for example, the Irish Network Against Racism, which is the Irish branch of the European Network Against Racism, the Immigrant Council of Ireland. You've also got the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland. Quote from their website, MRCI is a national organisation working to advance the rights of migrant workers and their families at risk of exploitation, social exclusion and discrimination. So that's pretty much socialism, anti-capitalism and mass immigration and anti-racism combined in one sentence, right? So you have to congratulate them for being good at what they do. Now again, a rookie wouldn't know that this is Marxist, okay? It also works with, quote, migrants and their families in Ireland to promote justice, empowerment and equality. Right, so the key words are right there. They're right there. But if someone doesn't know Marxism, you would never know that this is Marxist. Right, and see the symbols on the right, they don't really give anything away that they're necessarily Marxist in origin. But the words do, the language does. Here's another one. COLIV, right? So it says global solidarity in action. So COLIV is an Irish language or Gaelic language word meaning together, aka united, solidarity, etc. From their website, COLIV is the Irish Association of International Development Workers and Volunteers. We build and mobilise community around global justice issues. COLIV nurtures and supports work for change locally and globally and advocates for a world beyond injustice. So Its work is underpinned by a commitment to global citizenship education. Wow, so we're going to be global citizens now, which deepens understanding of the structural causes of inequality and unsustainability. So more of the same shit. There's not enough equity in the world, and also unsustainability. Remember limits to growth. Club of Rome earlier, same bullshit repackaged. Okay, this shit is everywhere. It's the same shit over and over again. So there's the LGBT organisation, some of them in Ireland. LGBT Ireland belong to NXF, National LGBT Federation, Outhouse LGBT Community Resource Centre, Transgender Equality Network Ireland. Then you've got, this is for another one, is Shout Out. So here's from their website, okay? Shout Out is a registered charity committed to improving life for LGBTQ plus people by educating school students, parents and guardians, teachers, youth workers and workplaces on LGBTQ issues. Since 2012, we've completed over 1,800 student workshops. That means we've spoken directly to over 54,000 students. Now, these fuckers, even if they're exaggerating the numbers, that's a tremendous amount. Let's cut it in half. 25,000 students, 27,000, right? That's still a lot. That's an awful lot of brainwashing going on. You can see these NGOs are working with the schools and the government. They're all working together to brainwash the kids into Marxism and this degeneracy, right? So you can see on the right, top right, you can see Leo Varadkar, the gay Indian, former Irish Prime Minister, with the t-shirt Broad. So Broad is the Irish language word for pride. So this is a pride march, as you can see from the colours. Here are some of the green environmentalist groups. So you can see Stop Climate Chaos, Climate Ambassador, Friends of the Earth, Irish Environmental Network, Environmental Protection Agency, Environmental Pillar, Friends of the Irish Environment. You know, this is tiny Ireland. And remember, even if it were true, which it isn't, that CO2 is controlling the weather patterns and causing global warming and so on, Ireland is such a small country. It's 7 million for the whole island. There's only one major city really, which is Dublin. This CO2 output is infinitesimal. It's nothing. So even if it was true that this was a major global issue, remember China's CO2 output is probably like 400 times more than Ireland, 500 times. The population is 1.4 billion in China. They've got loads of major cities and they're throwing up coal plants, gas-fired power plants left, right and centre, and nuclear plants, but they don't pollute. But the other ones do, and they don't give a shit. And yet we have to stop our CO2 emissions. It's nonsense. It's a big subject into itself, but it's all bullshit. Here's another one. Here's some of the feminist groups, right? So you've got Irish Feminist Network, National Women's Council of Ireland, Women's Aid, Action Aid. So another one is ROSA, right? So you can see the logo on the left, Reproduction Rights Against Oppression, Sexism and Austerity. They're so cringy, but they think they're really clever. So this is from their website, named after revolutionary socialist Rosa Luxemburg and civil rights campaigner Rosa Parks as well. We are an international network of socialist feminists established by women, LGBTQI, young people of colour activists fighting all forms of misogyny and sexism linked to the fight for rent control and public housing. Oh my God. The fight for decent and equal pay, the climate justice movement, and fighting racism, transphobia, and the far right. So as many Marxist catchphrases as you can fit in there. Help us build a socialist feminist movement allied with the working class and oppressed of this world to struggle against all exploitation and oppression and fight for a socialist future free from violence, wealth inequality, and environmental destruction. Wow. Where do I sign up? They sound like they're going to fix everything. Here's another one. So this one's called Radicaline, right? So those of you who if you speak English but you're not Irish, some of these words are going to look a little bit strange. So Radicaline, so this name is a Marxian portmanteau. So it's like creating a new word from two words, right? So you combine the word radical with colleen, which is the Irish Gaelic language word for girl. So radicaleen. So radical, colleen, radicaleen. This is from their website's homepage. Quote, "We are a women's liberation group made up of Irish and migrant women who recognize that women's oppression is based on the material reality of our biological sex." So in other words, women are being oppressed because they're women. "This group was created to counter the misogynistic narratives and practices in our culture. Our group provides advocacy and community to women interested in campaigning for women's liberation." Wow. Where do I sign up? So we need to save those women. Women of the world, unite. You've nothing to lose but your chains, right? In fact, one of the feminist groups in Ireland in the past were called Chains or Change, I think. So basically, stay a prisoner or have a revolution and be free. Get out of the kitchen. Stop having babies for your man. Get out there, travel the world and have a career and do all this exciting stuff. You don't want to be oppressed by being a housewife, etc. So here's some of the commie uni courses in Ireland. So in Dublin, you have three of the main institutions we have in Dublin City are Trinity College Dublin, Dublin City University and University College Dublin. There's approximately 70,000 students between them, to my knowledge. You see images on the right. Just a very quick overview. So Trinity College, this is all in my book, obviously. The Trinity College offers a postgraduate certificate in diversity and inclusion in further education and training, a postgraduate 2-year full-time course called Gender and Women's Studies. Sign me up. An undergraduate course in gender and sexuality in early modern Europe. An undergraduate course in Stalinism and society in Eastern Europe. It also has an equality office and a branch of the Workers' Party, as far as I know. So Trinity College, yet another hotbed for these this Marxist degeneracy. Here's another one. Dublin. This is Trinity College Dublin is right in the centre, in the heart of the city. Dublin City University is a little bit in the north side. So they offer an MA in Sexuality Studies, a postgraduate certificate in Sexuality Education and Sexual Wellbeing, right? An MA in Refugee Integration, an undergraduate in Climate and Environmental Sustainability, an online Equality, Diversity and Inclusion course, and it has a Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. So that's two universities well and truly captured by Marxism. Here's the University College Dublin, which offers a course module in Feminism and Gender Justice, an MA in Gender Studies, an MSc Masters in Equality Studies, an MSc in Climate Change, and a BSc 4-year social justice course. So the course description for the MA in Gender Studies says this under the Careers and Employability heading, quote, "Graduates have become central members of local communities, key members of NGOs, employers and public sector agencies, education and media." So the university is pumping out these people fucked up in the head with Marxism who are going into positions of authority across Irish society, right? And obviously they're sympathetic to Marxism, at the minimum sympathetic, at least familiar to it, or they could be full-blown fanatics, and these people are fucking everywhere in Irish society. Now in this section here, I'm going to go into various groups and incarnations. And again, the book is a monster at over 600 pages long. So this is just some of the key elements from that. So we've got, to start us off here, the infamous Fabian Society. So this is goes right back in history to 1884. It's a very important group. So established in 1884, they branches in the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand and Sicily of all places. They're very well connected internationally. They established the British Labour Party and they're officially a think tank of the same. They established the LSE, London School of Economics and Political Science, in 1895. the British Prime Ministers Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and Keir Starmer are all Fabians. They're all members of the Fabian Society. All Labour Party leaders, all of the top members in the Labour Party, going right back to Clement Attlee after World War II in particular, all of them have been Fabians. Also, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan is a member of the Fabian Society. So this isn't a made-up conspiracy group. They're real. They have a website. You can check it out. I think it's fabians.org. So they're out in the open. They really are an openly Marxist group. Now the Fabians are really interesting because they're a little bit different in terms of their tactics, right? So they want revolution, but their methods are a little bit different. So they're not about the workers' overthrow of the system. It's a little bit different to that. It's not like a violent overthrow. It's a bit more sneaky. So here's the Fabian coat of arms, right? So it's essentially malevolence disguised as benevolence, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So it comes disguised as one of you, one of your own, as a friend, but it's really a vicious predator disguised as the harmless prey. In short, this is a hostile attack on unsuspecting victims using stealth. Now, this is important to absorb because when I say communism is taking over the world, people say, what are you talking about? There's no workers' revolution. We still have rich people. We still have elites running the government. What are you talking about? This isn't communism. They will say this isn't communism either because there's no communist army coming over the hill, right? Like, the North Korean War, the Vietnam War, and so on. They're saying, what do you mean it's communism? This is a different type of communism. It's sneaky. It's about ideas. It's about knowledge. It's about changing the culture towards communism. It's a little bit different. So it's a little bit sneakier and much more difficult to spot and understand. So the Fabian model describes why the Western civilization is collapsing. Unfortunately, people can't see it because they don't have the knowledge. So here's the Fabian window. So this is a stained glass window located at the School of Economics. It was designed by one of the Fabian Society, the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. It was commissioned in 1910. Okay, it was unveiled by the UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's a Fabian himself, at a ceremony in April 2006. In the window, you can see three Fabians, Shaw, Webb, and E.R. Peace, are pictured reforging the earth on an anvil using hammers. As you can see on the right, we'll have a close-up in a moment, but to the right you can see the earth is on an anvil, right? So the earth is being heated up, right? So they're heating up the earth to hit it with hammers to change the earth. So they're talking about changing how the world works, which is exactly what's happened, right? Everyone should be able to see that. And above the earth you can see the Fabian coat of arms. So what they're saying in that symbol is, the last sentence there almost says, using Masonic hammers, they are shattering the earth to bits to remold the earth as they see fit to build a new world, right? That's what they're showing us in this image. And so above the world you can see the Fabian, the coat of arms, and we'll zoom in here. At the bottom you can see all of the Fabians praying to their scriptures, right? Now for years I used to think that the New World Order was about the Jews or about the Freemasons or the Knights of Malta or the Temple of Set or the Ordo Templi Orientis or the Satanists and this and that, but it's just communism. That's all it is. They've actually been telling us that that's what it is, and they love it when we put the blame in other areas. They're masters at hiding their intentions. So across the top of the window you can see remolded nearer to the heart's desire. This is from a quatrain by the Persian poet, I think Omar Khayyam. It's like a romantic poem or something, but that's where they got the idea from. Before I continue, there's another thing I didn't include before I move on to the next slide properly. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, I put this in the book, these were British Prime Ministers, both made statements in the 90s and in the 90s talking about a new world order. And everyone thought, oh, a new world order, the elites. But it went over people's heads that they were Fabians, and people start talking about the international bankers and they start going off the deep end. They completely missed the reference. It's just international communism. That's all it is. there's something else I forgot to include. I just realized I didn't include it. The Fabian coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing, but their logo was a tortoise. A tortoise, right? Why? Because a tortoise moves really slowly, right? The Fabians are not in a rush to take over. They gradually make progress like a walking tortoise. So, okay, I'm hitting you with some animals here. A wolf in sheep's clothing is their methodology. It's stealth. It's something evil disguised as something good, but the tortoise represents gradual progress, constant progress, right? So it's not a violent, immediate overthrow. It's gradually turning the culture towards communism to brainwash people into wanting to go along with this global agenda. So again, Fabianism describes more accurately why the world is falling apart, the Fabian method of takeover. So here's H.G. Wells. The world famous English author H.G. Wells was a member of the Fabian Society from 1903 to 1908, so he wasn't in it the whole time. He did try to take over the leadership from George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb at one stage, but he was a bit of a head case, crazy guy. So Wells was a Darwinist and lifelong advocate of socialism and eugenics. He believed that collectivism should become the new opiate of the masses, the new religion. Now, a lot of the Fabians thought just like him. Here's from his 1940 book, New World Order, quote, "This new and complete revolution we contemplate can be defined in a very few words. It is outright world socialism, scientifically planned and directed, and sedulous expansion of the educational organization to the ever-growing demands of the new order." Right? So he's talking about using the education system to create this new world order. Right? And the idea of scientifically planned, that comes from, scientific socialism and so on, that this is a scientific method of creating a better world, a better society, a utopia. Here's another very interesting quote. "The reorganization of the world has at first to be mainly the work of a movement or a party or a religion or cult, whatever we choose to call it. We may call it the new liberalism or the new radicalism or whatnot. It will not be a close-knit organization, towing the party line and so forth. It may be very loose-knit and many-faceted." Now that sums up the Fabian mindset very, very well. You see the way he says the new liberalism or the new radicalism. They will call it anything but what it is to keep you guessing. Right? It's very old Marxist tactic. And he said also very loose-knit and many-faceted. So that means that's what we're dealing with now in society. There's no one group in Ireland that's causing this. It's loads of groups with lots of people, and they're all brainwashed. And the same thing goes for the US, Australia, the UK, or even non-English speaking countries and so on. It's always the same. It's the Fabian model of takeover. Here's another quote which is a little bit disturbing. "Countless people, from Maharajas to millionaires and from Pukka Sahibs to pretty ladies, will hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it. When we attempt to estimate its promise, we have to bear in mind the stress of a generation or so of malcontents." So even back then, he's talking about how people were going to try to fight back and people were going to die. Because, they're trying to fight back from the system. Now, I don't think I included any G.B. Shaw quotes, which I should have, but George Bernard Shaw was another psychopath, degenerate eugenicist, who he believed a lot of people needed to die to build this new socialist utopia, this new world order. A lot of the Fabians had these eugenics ideas about them. Maybe I'll include that another time. So here's the Frankfurt School. The infamous Frankfurt School is originally the Institute for Marxism, and it was renamed Institute for Social Research. So again, a little bit sneaky. It was established at the University of Frankfurt, Germany in 1923. Let me know, folks, if my audio is still loud enough, because I'm just a little bit late here. It's midnight here, and I'm trying not to piss off the neighbours. But just let me know if it's too low. So it was established at the University of Frankfurt, Germany, 1923. Thank you. They had to get out of Germany because of obviously the Nazis coming to power. Because they were Jewish Marxists. The Nazis didn't like Jews, they didn't like Marxists, so they had to skedaddle out of Europe, and they arrived at Columbia University in 1934, and then they proceeded to contaminate the American academic system. So you had, it was composed of these Marxist intellectuals, right? Intellectual Marxists, like Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and a bunch of other various members at different times. So it's often been said that this group kind of fused the ideas of Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Antonio Gramsci. So they used Karl Marx's economic ideas with Sigmund Freud's psychological ideas and the tactical ideas of Antonio Gramsci. So their work, so Antonio Gramsci was the one who was famous for the idea of the long march through the institutions, right? He wrote it in his prison notebooks. Benito Mussolini put him in prison in Italy, and when he was in prison, he wrote these prison notebooks, which got translated years later. And he promoted the idea of turning the culture towards Marxism by slowly infiltrating all of the institutions within society. So their work, the Frankfurt School's work, paved the way for destructive concepts such as critical theory, critical race theory, and what's called cultural relativism. So I'm sure you've heard about critical theory, critical race theory. Cultural relativism is the idea of that no culture is better than the other culture. This is pretty much the Marxists were paving the way for today, this world we have today, where we have the clash of cultures, and the Marxists are so obsessed with the idea of equality, but we know that cultures and so on aren't equal. So cultural relativism is a way of them disarming us. It's a way of shutting up people like myself who will say that Western civilization is better than third world civilization and we should be mixed together. That's connected in with that. It's one of the factors in this. Marcuse was the prominent member of the Frankfurt School. I'm not going to go through all their opinions and books. It would be a waste of time, but Marcuse was the prominent member of the Frankfurt School. He advocated the biased pro-Marxist political and social environment of liberating tolerance, which meant, quote, intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left, the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose the extension of public services, social security, medical care, etc. And this is from, I think, his essay, Repressive Tolerance in 1965. So look at all those keywords there. He's basically saying that anyone who is not supporting Marxist causes shouldn't be allowed free speech. Does that ring any bells? Hate speech, hate crime, right? It's the same tactic being used. If you, like I said, if you want to start up a group where trannies can meet up every weekend, or you get out in the street and promote BLM, or you want to promote abortion or something, you can have all the free speech you want. But if you go against Marxism, you won't be allowed any more free speech in the future. That's the society we're moving towards. And again, because of the level of ignorance about Marxism, people just can't see it. Another example, like I mentioned in the first part of the presentation, was the protest exclusion zone law around abortion clinics, right? So anyone opposing abortion protesting is not going to be allowed to do that. It's going to be illegal. They don't want any girls or females going to get an abortion having second thoughts. So they want to keep these evil far-right people away. It's a very typical Marxist tactic. So Marcuse said this as well: one can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution since the protest is directed toward the whole cultural establishment. Here's the key part: the traditional idea of revolution and the traditional strategy of revolution has ended. These ideas are old-fashioned. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and dispersed disintegration of the system. So that's sneaky talk, right? He's saying that the old way of revolution is done. We need to have a new way where we kind of wiggle in there, right? Diffuse and disperse, disintegration. So they're trying to break up the system, right, with subversive means. He said that in 1937. Now, I mentioned the Frankfurt School, I mentioned Gramsci, Marcuse. They're all part of the cult. They all want this globalist communist revolution, but they're contributing towards it in different ways. And the movement as a whole has been progressively learning. Every single type of Marxist cult member over the years who've put in their own theories and thoughts have made the overall movement stronger. And that's why we are getting our asses kicked in Western countries, because this movement has a long tradition of subversion and conspiracy, and the average person just can't see it. So now, neo-Marxists like Marcuse gave up on the traditional class struggle concept of the rich against the poor, or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, because the working class were now too comfortable within the capitalist system. So they still want their revolution. So how could they do this? So to find a replacement for the working class, Marcuse suggested creating oppressed classes throughout society, which provided the activist revolutionary element. So they needed new people to fit that role of the oppressed, because without the oppressed, you can't have revolution. Somebody needs to feel like they're being oppressed to make all this revolution work. He suggested that this could be a coalition of various oppressed groups. Lovely. Quote, the substratum of the outcasts and outsiders, the exploited and persecuted of other races and other colours, the unemployed and the unemployable, etc. That's just one of the quotes from One Dimensional Man. So here's another important element of Marxism in the book that I mentioned called postmodernism, right? So here's a quote from Dr. Michael Sugrue. This is from his presentation entitled Jean-François Lyotard, The Postmodern Condition. Quote, postmodernism generates a philosophy of resistance, of negation. It is not a logically coherent system. It is systematic distrust, organized skepticism, systematic suspicion, which is an excellent summary of what it is. So there's another intellectual outgrowth of Marxism. So again, we're back to the same thing. These are not, they're not commie soldiers. They're not workers with the pitchforks. These are fucking academics, right? They're one of the worst perpetrators of this ideology we've ever had. So a form of philosophy which emerged later in the 19th century, the late 1800s. This postmodernism challenged previously held common philosophical perspectives formulated during previous centuries in the areas of science, identity and culture, linguistics, history, etc. Basically, the Enlightenment ideas of the 17th and 18th centuries. So it challenged these old ideas, right? It was pushed by French cult member intellectuals via academia. People like, you can see the pictures from going clockwise from the top left is Jean-François Lyotard, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jean-Paul Sartre. These are like some of the main characters involved, but there was loads of them. And these are French academics, and all of them, most of them were engaged in Marxist activism, at least in their youth. They kind of calmed down when they got older. Michel Foucault, that degenerate freak, he was an activist for most of his life. It claims that postmodernism claims that human behavior is programmed primarily through social conditioning as opposed to human nature. For example, gender is a social construct, right? It pushes the idea of subjectivism rather than objectivism. So, for example, my truth, you hear people saying my truth. It's all about what you personally think is real, right? Another example is when people say, I prefer not to see it that way. Right, everyone said that at some stage in their life. That's kind of the postmodern cultural influence. So it basically, postmodernism says there's no such things as universal truth or logic or reason. Right, there's no standard that we all have to live up to when it comes to intelligence or logic. Rather, it's all about your own personal interpretations. Right, now this is very dangerous because it encourages delusion and solidifies indoctrination. So the enemy of indoctrination is rational, logical thinking. So you can see how this is very toxic. It paves the way for people being delusional and detached from reality. So moving on to just some observations about Marxism in general. is this a cult? Right. So why do I say it's a cult? So the word cult from the Latin cultus, which means worship, and the word colere, meaning cultivate. So from dictionary.com, quote, an instance of great veneration of a person, ideal, or thing, especially as manifested by a body of admirers, a group or sect bound together by veneration of the same thing, person, ideal, etc. A group having a sacred ideology and a set of rites. No worries. Thanks, Fanula. Thanks for your help earlier. Appreciate it. A group or sect. So a group having a sacred ideology and a set of rites centering around their sacred symbols. A religion or sect considered to be false, unorthodox, or extremist. Right. So what are the attributes of a cult? So, sorry, the image in the last slide was Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Marx, and I forget the last one. I think Stalin. So attributes of a cult, right? So think of the stereotypes of what a cult is. A cult is often a group that has a superiority complex, has a strong sense of fraternity or love amongst its members that does not apply to those outside. So they feel good together. They make each other feel good in their movement. It gives them this weird kind of sense of love when they're together with other Marxist activists. They love each other in a really fucked up way, right? Also, the cult group has delusions of grandeur, which appeals to the delusions of grandeur of the individuals composing it. So they have these ideas, these great ideas that they are great people and they have some sort of amazing purpose. So cults often, they feels it's fighting for some sort of important unresolved issue that the world must be made aware of, or some other lofty purpose, right? So they have this amazing goal. They're going to fix the world like no one has before. They are the special ones who are going to save us all from ourselves, right? That's the part of their thinking, right? A cult is revolutionary in nature. They want to influence or change the world somehow. So that they don't just have, ideas that they can change the world. They're willing to actually do something and put it into action. They want revolution. They want change. So this is another reason why it's a cult, right? So Marxist cult members show great veneration for certain historical personalities and hold them aloft as quasi-prophets. So they're almost treated like prophets. So on the left, you've got Karl Marx, who's revered as some sort of a genius, economist, sociologist, and all this bullshit, where he's really a pretty useless man. And he wasn't even good at what he wrote about. He wasn't very as knowledgeable as people think, or as accurate or prophetic or correct. Then you've got Vladimir Lenin, another contender for the worst scumbag of all time. He was arguably worse than Marx because he actually put some of the theories into practice in a way, and physically himself created a situation where a lot of people died and suffered. You've got Leon Trotsky, another scumbag. He was revered as some sort of a god in Trotskyism. He was later assassinated by Stalin in Mexico. You've also got Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentinian cult member, who is revered as kind of a god and a symbol for revolution. He's another sociopath, rapist and murderer. You've also got Mao Zedong as well, another probably the worst commie scumbag of all time, killed tens of millions of his own people, and he's still regarded as some sort of a prophet or a superhuman man. It's really despicable. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if it was a nice pick or a nice axe. I can't remember, but it wasn't nice anyway. But yeah, well spotted. So here's the clenched fist, right? The clenched fist is the symbol. So you see this a lot with Marxists, the old clenched fist, right? And that's where, again, they're actually telling us the way they talk, the way they act, their symbols, the colours, and their gestures tell us that they're Marxists. So in the top left, you can see Free Palestine, got the clenched fist. The next one is labour unions, the workers' general strike. The kind of rose, I think, is the Socialist International or the Progressive International. I can't remember. You can see it's a red rose with a fist in the middle, right? And the one on the right, I just put that in because I thought it was funny. It's the bi fist, so bisexual people, fisting each other. And the bottom right, you've got the Another Clench Fist movie festival. You got an eco Clench Fist for the climate change movement, Black Lives Matter, of course, and then feminism as well. Of course, same thing, Clench Fist. So the top left, you can see Palestinian rights in London. March, it's Clench Fist again, Free Palestine. Top center is Black Lives Matter. And top right was those American athletes at the Olympics. Can't remember the year, but they're doing the Black Power, like the Black Panthers Clench Fist. I realize, I know you can't see me when I do that. I'll put my hand there. So there, Clench Fist, okay. The bottom left is, I think there are a bunch of workers striking in Manchester, probably in the 60s or something. Bottom center, likely feminist march. Bottom right, more Black Lives Matter with the sign, I can't breathe. Very funny. So here's more of the symbology and so on. So on the top left, you have the flag of Democratic Kampuchea, which was Cambodia back in the day. I think it was 75 to 79 when Salazar, aka Pol Pot, killed a few million of his own people. One of the worst genocides in the history of communism. You've got the flag of the PRC to the right of that, People's Republic of China. To the right of that is the DPRK flag, which is another red star. The hammer and sickle, the red star, the colour red, you see them being used a lot. So that's North Korea. The one to the right is, I can't remember that, to my shame, which one that is. It's not Soviet, I think it's another country. Bottom right is the hammer and sickle. Socialist Forever, Socialist Party symbol. The one towards the bottom left of the earth is the symbol of the Comintern, established in 1919, one of the most significant groups in the history of this ideology. They were the groups who established communist parties all across the world. And the bottom left is the Socialist International, I think, the bottom left. But yeah, it's got another rose and the colour red and so on. So you get the idea. They tend to reuse the colours and symbols. I've got a notification here on my laptop here. What is this? If anyone joined late, just letting you know that this is part 2 of my presentation on Marxism. The first part 1 is the pinned tweet on my X profile. It's also in my YouTube video as well. It's the presentation on Marxism at the University of Dallas I did a few weeks ago. So here's Yuri Bezmenov. Not long to go now till I'm finished. Here's Yuri Bezmenov. He was a great man. I have a whole section about him in the book. He's a defector, a Soviet defector. He was stationed in India in the 1960s. He was a press officer with Novosti Press, which is the kind of the KGB, the propaganda arm of the KGB. He said this in an interview with G. Edward Griffin in 1983. He's talking about people being brainwashed with Marxism. He was saying, he was talking about in America, what it was like in America at the time. So he said, you are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They're programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind. Even if you expose them to authentic information, you still cannot change the basic perception and logical behavior. Now, that is one of the best sentence I've ever heard anybody say about this issue. They are contaminated. That's perfectly correct. They're programmed to think and react to stimuli in a certain pattern. So if you say you're against mass immigration, you think we shouldn't help other groups, they'll call you racist. Like I said in the first presentation, if you show certain behaviors, they will attack you, they will call you names. They're programmed to react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. So that is prophetic words from Yuri Bezmenov. Here's another one from the same interview in 1983. He was talking about ideological subversion, which was the Soviet method for infecting countries with Marxism. And I quote, what ideological subversion basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American, or pick your own country, of every Irish person, to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Right? Now that sums up why in Ireland right now people can't get organised and they still don't know what they're dealing with. They're fighting a globalist, communist, New World Order system. But people are confused because they're demoralized and they've got all these silly ideas and they don't know what they're dealing with. They can't get organized. No one can come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending their nation, pretty much. So he said that back in 1983. So it's just over 40 years ago. When it comes to the indoctrination, it's a sliding scale, right? People can be indoctrinated to different degrees. Someone can be severely indoctrinated or slightly indoctrinated. So you see in the image there, you can see, a little kid being brainwashed with climate change. You could argue is probably only mildly indoctrinated. And you've got a vegan there who's a little bit, you've got a fascist, anti-fascist who are a little bit more extreme, and you've got members of the People's Liberation Army in China, the Chinese army, are probably a little bit more indoctrinated. So it's a sliding scale. People are indoctrinated to different degrees. That's part of the problem we're dealing with, unfortunately. Now, I apologize, some of these slides aren't finished because I kind of put them together in a rush. So you can see, to the left, people casually protesting in a trans rights march probably aren't as bad as a full-on feminist. And then look on the far right, I just put that in for a laugh. That's Fat Boy Kim Jong-un, the commie dictator of North Korea, with these females hanging off him, hysterical, like they're meeting some sort of a god. This is part of the problem we're dealing with. People can be indoctrinated to different levels. Here's another quote from Bezmenov. Understand what's going on around you. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. And he said that in 1983. Because people were saying back then that he was saying people think they're in the peacetime, but they're not. They're actually in a war. We've always been at war with communism for over 100 years. There's never been a peacetime. So here's just add-ons to what I said in the last presentation, that Marxism is AIDS for countries. Marxism destroys countries. Here's a quote from the chess legend and political activist Garry Kasparov, from his book Winter is Coming in 2015. Quote, communism is like an autoimmune disorder. It doesn't do the killing itself, but it weakens the system so much that the victim is left helpless and unable to fight off anything else. It's quite an interesting analogy. We're talking about countries. So the ideology of Marxism does to nations what the HIV virus can do to the human body. Now, not everything to do with Marxism is about class struggle, like we were talking about earlier, oppressor versus oppressed. In my opinion, one of the worst things Marxism does is that it destroys patriotism. It destroys countries. It's anti-patriotism, essentially, right? So it's not the actual virus that kills a person when it comes to HIV. However, it may neutralize the immune system when rendering it ineffective. A HIV plus person may be diagnosed with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome or AIDS. A person can then die of multiple causes that would, under normal circumstances, be dealt with by the immune system. So essentially, an ineffective immune system leads to a weakened, vulnerable organism, right? So imagine countries as being organisms. If a country is an organism, then its immune system is its sense of uniqueness, traditions, patriotism, religiosity, culture, etc. Marxism, the cult ideology, erodes and eventually neutralizes these aspects of a nation. Once this immune system is removed from the equation, the organism or nation is then wide open to attack. Not only does Marxism break down the wall that protects the nation, it invites in dangerous pathogens, the various Marxian sub-agendas, feminism, mass immigration, LGBTQ, economy destroying, climate change, activism, etc., and their effects. So it invites those things in. The Marxism, the cult ideology, is a diseased wrecking ball for a nation's perimeter wall, both symbolically and literally if we include a country's international border. So Marxism makes countries defenseless, essentially. It makes countries defenseless from attack. They lose their integrity, right? Their structural integrity, their perimeter wall. So a sliding scale. A person in today's world, a person either supports internationalism or globalism or opposes it to one degree or another. At this time, this is all that matters when we are judging people on political, geopolitical, sociological, or bigger picture issues, right? Since there are many combinations of personality, it's a sliding scale. So you can see this is nothing to do with the political, Overton window or the political dichotomy of left or right. It's not necessarily to do with that. I'm just talking about globalism. But you can see on the scale, on the left, those supporting internationalist globalism, and those on the right, those opposing internationalist globalism, and all the variations in between. So everyone you know, including yourself, is somewhere on that scale. I am extremely on the far right in this scale. This is my only purpose, is to oppose this globalist system. There's all these different everybody in society fits somewhere on this. You're either against this or you're for it to one degree or another. And at the bottom, of course, globalism is internationalist, totalitarian, revolutionary Marxism. It's all the same thing. It's all about world domination, right? So using that same scale, you can see on the left, sorry, I made a mistake here. I should be the other way around. It doesn't match the last graph, but I'll explain this one anyway. So on the left in this one, you can see, I'll start on the right. So on the right, you've got all the Marxists, the cult members. They're trying to drag us towards, in the top right, they're trying to drag us towards world government, economic collapse, social division and conflict, and universal uniformity. They're dragging us stubbornly, psychotically, dragging us towards all that crap. And on the left, everybody else, more or less, is trying to drag us, our countries, towards national sovereignty, economic prosperity, social cohesion, and genuine diversity. One of the effects of Marxism is that it destroys the naturally occurring diversity in society. It drags us, it ruins those things, and those of us who are fighting Marxism, fighting globalism, are actually protecting whatever genuine diversity we have left. So just to finish up, I've got a few slides here on solutions. So this is about suppressing the ideology. So what can we do to fix this problem, right? So just to put it straight, I'll go for the jugular here right at the beginning. At the top of the slide, I say the goal. So goal, incrementally reducing the ratio of cult members. So we have to keep this in mind. The best way to save our countries from globalism is to incrementally reduce the amount of people in our society who are brainwashed with Marxism, who are on that scale I talked about. Where are they? Are they fighting globalism? Are they helping? We have to gradually move everyone over to the fighting globalism side, and obviously Marxists are on the opposite side. So we need to incrementally reduce the amount of these people in society through changing the culture, stop new people getting brainwashed, and also suppress and marginalize people who are already brainwashed, to take them away from power and influence. So of course we have to replace the degeneracy in education and culture, in our culture, with patriotic traditional values, right? So everyone's been talking about that for years. And these are just some of the solutions. We need to ban the NGOs and the non-profits, anyone pushing Marxism. We need to close those down. We need to stop all that because they drain money from the economy and they create more activists. And it's also they promote Marxism, which brings in more cult members. So we can't have that in the future. We need to, when it comes to education, we could ban Marxism being taught in universities. It cannot be allowed to continue where young impressionable minds are being brainwashed in schools. It might be primary school, secondary school, or high school, or university. At any level, we need to make sure that this stops. Or another option is that we could still teach Marxism, but teach it in a critical way and expose it for what it is, so people have the knowledge go out. So I would love to be part of an initiative like that in Ireland or in any other Western country, to actually to educate people on and keep them immune from this ideology and raise awareness about it, which is the opposite to what's been done to now, where it's been taught in a positive light. So it's like preventing people from being brainwashed, essentially. That you would need, society would need people like myself to do this job, or to train people to teach this, to do this job. obviously the idea of only teaching to criticize it might popularize it and make it attractive, so we have to work it out. And I pose the question, will this work when we still have so many brainwashed people around who will glorify it? So it's very, very difficult to try and fix this, but we need everybody on board with the idea that Marxism is negative first before we get there, and people can't get to that point unless they have the knowledge, which is where the book and the presentations come in. And I'm not the only one doing this job, but people need to learn it before they can start opposing it and before we can start detoxifying of it. I would recommend banning marches, public displays. That includes the Pride March, Drag Queen Story Time, all that stuff needs to be banned. If enough people hate this and don't want it to happen anymore, it will ban. There is such a thing as people power, but enough people need to have the intelligence to realize these things are toxic, and then we can use social pressure to ban all these things, to stop them across society. These things only exist because they're being supported by a certain population, of a portion of the population. It's not just the government doing this, it's the general public or think these things are benevolent, and that's the problem. We also need to ban abortion services, which originates from feminism. There's loads of things we need to do. There's just some off the top of my head. We've also got the free speech problem as well, and we're going to have to deal with that in the future, where when we start suppressing Marxism, people are going to say, what about my free speech? Well, fuck your free speech. People shouldn't have free speech if they're going to be Marxist. This is where people often repeat the concept of free speech like parrots, without engaging their intelligence. Yeah, it is a good thing, and we've been talking about it a lot, because the globalist system will suppress your speech if you're going against globalism. Where I'm talking about suppressing globalist speech, I'm talking about suppressing Marxist speech. That is ethical and benevolent, and it is something we need to push for, because, as I argue in the book, Marxism is extremely toxic, and it goes from person to person through speech. And so there's a problem here, and I'm predicting a lot of people are going to struggle with what I'm saying, because they've got a distorted perception of what's right and wrong. Nobody has the right to spread Marxism in society. This thing is from the pit of hell. We've never seen anything like this, and it's bringing us towards World War III, and people can't even see it. And then someone's going to try to argue with me that it's okay for people to talk about this openly and brainwash people around them. No, it isn't. No. This is above ideas like free speech. This is above all that, and we shouldn't tolerate any of this at all in society. Nobody has the right to peddle an anti-humanity ideology from the pit of hell. Nobody has that right. Okay, this has got, in my opinion, this is going to really test people's concept of ethics, intelligence, and their understanding of the bigger picture and what the purpose of all this is really. There's also the human rights problem. So that's another thing that Marxists are going to do. People are brainwashed. They're going to start crying about their human rights when they start taking their rights away, because they're causing trouble. So for example, the trans activists might say their human rights are being infringed upon because they're not allowed to teach in schools, or not allowed to march in the street and so on. But if we let them do it, they're bringing more people into the movement and normalizing it, which can't be. We can't accept that. Not at this stage of the game. And actually, Yuri Bezmenov, who I mentioned earlier, he advocated us taking away people's rights who are being Marxists. He said the alternative to that is that you're going to end up with civil war or societal breakdown. So you can either do it the nice way and be a little bit firm on these people and take away their rights and follow some of the recommendations I've made, or you can give them their freedom to be psychotic and to ruin society, and then you end up back in this situation we're in now, which isn't intelligent or noble. And I think I'm going to really struggle getting this point across to people that one of the best ways to do it in the future is to suppress people's rights if they're going to be psychotic Marxist activists. I think some people are going to struggle with that, to be honest. So the role of parents is really important. So parents need to beware of anyone working with or on behalf of the state. So those in educational or influential capacity, the odds are high that they've received a contaminated Marxist education, which they will then pass on to your children. So we need to keep an eye on anyone else our parents need to keep an eye on anyone else who could influence their child. This can come from friends, relations, co-workers, teammates at sports, and let's not forget the media, entertainment, social media influences. So society is full of people who can contaminate your kids with Marxism, and we need to stop. We need to somehow fix that, right? So there's a parent there reading his kid the Communist Manifesto, but this is a really difficult situation that unfortunately we need to find a way of keeping our kids separate from this indoctrination, or we can just forget about the whole thing. That, you know, the world is going to just go down to the toilet, and there's nothing we can do to stop it if we keep allowing Marxists to brainwash kids. Right now, how do we fix this? Parents need to be educated about Marxism. If they're not educated about Marxism, they're not going to be able to keep their kids insulated from Marxism. It's just basic logic. That's why one of the target groups of the book was parents. You know, the targets of my work with the presentations of, I'm shooting that at everybody, but particularly parents, because kids are the future, and this needs to take a top priority. Talking about politics and elections and all that stuff isn't going to matter at all if every day like that new people are being brainwashed into joining the Marxist cult through schools and so on. So you forget about everything else. If we don't fight the battle for the control of the minds of kids, we're going to lose the whole war. Forget about the rest. You're wasting your time, because people like us are going to be the minority, and even smaller and smaller as time goes by, and the membership, the cult membership is going to continue to swell constantly. If people think it's bad now, wait till a few years down the line when all these kids start coming out of school, you know, and they will look at someone like me as being crazy because I say that climate change is a scam. You can't change your gender, you know, and so on and so forth. Or I don't agree with feminism. You know, they will look at me like I'm psychotic. But they're the ones who are fucked up in the head, you know. So people think it's bad now. You think it's dystopia now. Wait till a few years down the line when all these kids start coming out of school and graduating from college with their spaghetti logic brains, you know, with no conscience. One of the things that Marxism does is it amputates people's conscience. If they had one in the first place, it takes away their sense of right and wrong. So for parents, suspicion is required. Everyone must be vetted. So parents need to vet everyone around their kids. They need to vet everyone for Marxist indoctrination before they are allowed contact with the young. This is a really difficult task. A person, parent or not, needs to understand the ideology cult, Marxism, sufficiently in order to identify who's a cult member and who isn't. So people need to get good at figuring out who's brainwashed and who isn't, right? Everyone needs this. This is a new life skill now we all need. Parents must devote some time to studying and understanding this subject. So that's a give. It's a mandatory now. Every parent needs to study this subject. And I know it's difficult because when you're a parent, you gotta work, you gotta look after the kids, you gotta make sure they're fed, clothed, watered, they've got a social life. You know, you give them emotional support, financially support them, feed them, and look after them for years. You know, depending on the kid, it could be almost the first 20 years of their life. In addition to all of that, you need to keep them safe from Marxism. It's a really difficult time for people to have kids. So here's some of the problems. I'm almost finished. So here's some of the problems I run into when I'm teaching this subject, right? No worries, Philip. Appreciate it. Thank you. And make sure you check out the first part if you haven't seen it. It's my pinned tweet on X, and it's also another, it's on my YouTube page here. Part 1 of the presentation is the live one at the University of Dallas. So here's some of the problems I deal with when I'm teaching this or when I'm talking about this issue, right? It's very, very frustrating, right? Because this is why this is the biggest problem in the world, and it's very old. It's not new, but yet we still haven't fixed it because people's approaches have been wrong. So I've got a new approach to an old problem. Right, and these are some of the challenges I have to deal with. Right, so the top one there, some people focus on the totalitarian communist regimes of the past, or the Marxist-Lenin regimes of the past, like, you know, the Soviet Union, Red China, Pol Pot. You know, when I say Marxism, they want to talk about all that stuff. Now, those things aren't bad, or they want to talk about Mao and Mao Zedong in China, the Cultural Revolution, and so on, right? Or what happened in Cuba, and etc., etc. Now, talking about those things isn't bad, but it's not the main issue. Remember, you could talk about the history of this subject all day long, right? But if you don't talk about the brainwashing in the present and stop it in the present, you're wasting your time, right? So it's not bad to talk about those things because it shows the evil of what the ideology can bring or create in our world, absolutely, but it's not the priority. And sometimes when I deal with people talking about that, that's all they know is the historical stuff, but they're rubbish at analysing the economic side of it, or the psychological side of it, or the cultural side of it, or the political side of it, you know. So I always recommend a panoramic view with this stuff. Don't just learn about one bit because you end up very one-dimensional. Be a bit more panoramic, be a bit more multi-skilled and multifaceted. That's the best way to deal with this complex subject. So another problem I deal with is some people focus on Marxism from only a materialistic or economic point of view, aka socialism, the idea of a centralized government, appropriation of private property, equity, suppression of rights, etc. Again, talking about those things isn't bad, but it's not only about that. Marxism is yes, it's physical, but it's also metaphysical, psychological, etc. Right? So let's not get dragged into just one area of it. And I'm not minimizing those things. It is a pretty serious, horrible thing when you have a powerful state who's taking away people's rights and starts enforcing Marxist ideas, taking away their private property, trying to enforce equity, suppressing their free speech. Yeah, those things are horrible and they do ruin their lives and it leads to death and destruction. But I would always recommend don't just look at it just in terms of material things or rights and so on. Look at the bigger picture. Look at the psychological, the brainwashing, all of that to give yourself a nice panoramic view and not just bang the same drum all the time. The ideology itself is multifaceted, so we should be the same in our analysis, I believe. Here's another one, Zionism and the Jews. Right? This is a big problem. I deal with this all the time. There's an erroneous the myth that the Jews created communism, and whenever I bring up this subject, people want to start talking about the Jews. This is a really bad habit because if you look at a country like Ireland, it's Irish people brainwashed with this ideology who've been mostly responsible for destroying Ireland and continue to do so. And you know, it must be less than 1% of them are Jewish, probably, maybe even less than that. So this idea of blaming Zionism, the Jews, they create communism, is a distortion of the facts. Communism doesn't come from the Jews. The vast majority of people pushing this ideology at all levels are not Jewish. And people bring up examples like the Bolsheviks. They're mostly Jewish. Wasn't as many Jews in the Bolshevik regime as people think. They'll always bring up the Frankfurt School. Yes, they were all Jewish, but they were Marxist Jews. Not all Jews are the same, you see. It's a big complex subject, but as you can see here what I wrote, what it results in, the Fabian Society are one of the more powerful Fabian groups. They weren't Jewish at all. Karl Marx was Jewish. Engels, the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, wasn't Jewish, and a lot of the people who influenced Marx, like Hegel, Babeuf and so on, Rousseau, the majority of these characters were not Jewish. So the idea that communism comes from the Jews is a distortion of the facts. But also it leads to the point as well, who do you blame more? People who embody the ideology today in your country, or somebody who died 200 years ago? You know, it's a distorted way of trying to fix problems, and it doesn't produce results, right? So I mentioned here, blaming the Jews and Zionism allows people to blame a separate group, not their own people, right? It's a really bad habit, because what you're doing is you're saying that you're being oppressed by someone else. Ironically, someone else is to blame for the mess you're in. It never produces results. It's a really bad habit. In fact, it's a form of brainwashing. So in addition, as I said, it does nothing to solve the indoctrination problem. So there are hundreds of thousands of people in Ireland brainwashed with Marxism. A friend of mine put the estimate at 500,000. It could be higher than that, of people brainwashed with this. I don't really know. I'd have to look. You'd have to interview everyone to see where they are. But Ireland is a highly brainwashed place, like a lot of Western countries, and trying to blame some other group doesn't fix the issue at all. Another problem I deal is people going too deep are intellectualizing or stuck in theory, or they start talking about the opinions of what Marx said or Lenin and all these dead people, and they over-intellectualize the debate. And sometimes people get confused about my role. They think my role is to debate Marxism with them because that's what they're used to in colleges and so on. And I often get irritated when that happens. It might be an X space or something else. They think that our opinions are equal. I'm trying to fix the problem and they're trying to intellectually debate with me. They don't understand that they're getting in the way. And this is why Marxism is destroying the world, because we have all these people with big egos who want to just talk all day and are not actually interested in solving problems. It drives me mental. And you're going to notice that yourself if you want to get into this. People get stuck in the theory and in the past, or in opinions. They put their egos above what's right, which is a real shame and a real problem. Another problem group is Christians as well, surprisingly. And I deal with this sometimes because as I talk about in the book, there's a whole section in my book where I talk about the importance of Christianity. It's one of the pillars of the West, like capitalism, Christianity, culture are the pillars of the West, and Marxism destroys them. Christianity is an important part of the West. I'm not a Christian myself, but I would defend Christianity myself. And I often say that Marxism is Satanism repackaged, right? It's an anti-humanity ideology, as I mentioned. But the problem with Christians, I notice, is that some Christians feel that all they have to do is have faith and pray, and that's going to fix everything, or to be Christian. I disagree with that, right? It's a common mistake. And so sometimes some people can insinuate that having faith is more important than understanding Marxism. That's not true, because again, that does nothing to fix the problem of indoctrination in society, right? And that's like with any belief system. People tend to gravitate towards their own beliefs, and I noticed this with American Spaces in particular, when there'll be like hundreds of people listening. It's not like the Irish Spaces, there'll be like a few hundred people listening or 1,000 people listening or whatever, and there'll be a big emphasis on Christianity. And I hear them talking, it tends to become an echo chamber where they just start talking about their faith and being Christian, but it's just an echo chamber, not actually learning anything, and they switch off, and I don't think they have to listen to me or analysts like me about Marxism. That's a mistake. As I often point out, God never stepped in to stop communism killing all those people, and it included Christians, you know. This is not an insult to Christianity or to God, but the idea that God is going to step in and fix this problem for us is not true, right? So we have to do this ourselves, and logically speaking, having faith and praying, being Christian, is not going to stop Marxism, and never will. And this other idea as well of people saying that we need to go back to Christianity. This idea that we have to go back to Christianity, that's not going to work either, because not everybody's going to be Christian. So, I'm just talking about, these are all this list, these are some of the things that get in the way of us talking about this issue, and is actually can be counterproductive. So here's a little just thing, a thought that came into my head about the reason why Ireland is collapsing and it's struggling is because there's people that have these like as a nation we have these chameleon eyes. People are trying to project blame towards these different groups, right, these habits. So these are just some of the ones I could think of. So the Jews and Zionism, like I mentioned, people blame the Jews and Zionism for what's happened to their countries. Capitalism, which comes from Marxist brainwashing. Freemasons, which is a conspiratorial worldview, and they are a real group, but they're not to blame for what's happened to Ireland, I can tell you that much. The elites, right, is another one. Now, by the way, a lot of the internationalist bankers, globalist types, ideologically speaking, they're Marxist. People can be rich billionaires and still be Marxist, like a George Soros type, right? Now, a Marxist will come along and say, yeah, George Soros, and they might say he's evil. Some of them might, right? Because he's rich and he's a billionaire, but ideologically speaking, he's Marxist. He's a graduate of the London School of Economics, which I mentioned earlier, created by the Fabian Society, Some people say the elites, the New World Order, these people are ideologically internationalists. Marxism is internationalism, right? So the elites are Marxist oftentimes. A lot of people seem to miss that point. Here's another one, politicians and government. Yes, the Irish government, like a lot of Western governments, is full of degenerates and traitors who deserve life in prison, right? But again, constantly blaming the government for what's happened to the country doesn't really produce results, because remember, the government's a reflection of the people. people in Ireland have sleepwalked into this nightmare because we were all distracted and we let all these crazy fanatics get into power and start directing the country's affairs, and now we don't like the results. So again, it's back to the victimhood thing. Someone else is to blame for our situation. So everyone in Ireland, like all the other Western countries, all that drinking, partying, doing drugs, getting wrapped up in watching the sports, the reality TV programs, having your head up your ass in general, being wrapped up in your own emotional problems, being absorbed with making money or other stuff that's distracted you. Remember, while you've been alive all of your life, this ideology, this agenda, this world control agenda is older than you, whoever you are watching. Even if you're 110 years old, it's still older than you. So what were you doing your whole life? Where have you been? The same thing applies to me. Where have we all been when this thing has been built around us? Everyone's been distracted and caught up in their own bullshit. Now, the very young have an excuse because, when you're young and you're just kind of figuring things out. But what about all the people who are a bit older? What have they been doing? What have they learned? How come they have not seen this earlier? Another one in the bottom right there is the international bankers. Now, there's not just only one group or a certain type of individual to blame, but I'm just saying that people constantly apportion the blame to things outside themselves that they can't control. But what we can control is who around us in our society is brainwashed to go along with internationalism. That's actually something that can produce results. That's why I advocate us looking at that rather than putting the blame everywhere else. So here's from Karl Marx's tombstone from his where he's buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. This is one of his quotes. So I think it's one of his quotes. "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Right? So that's like a wow, wonderful, wise statement from Marx. That's a very interesting idea, but you should know what the fuck you're doing. So this is a major problem with us dealing with kids brainwashed with Marxism. The young should just live their lives a bit first before they think about trying to change the world. Young people in particular are in no position to change society. They can barely even control themselves. They're not mature enough to. But this kind of message here on this tombstone is what's being pushed through the universities and through the culture. They're trying to get little kids, with single digit ages, 8 and 9 years old, to be revolutionaries and take over the world. So it's a major problem. But this notion is, to add on to this, if you're going to try and impact on the world, you better know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to make a mess. And Marxism, from this point of view, is a prolifically failing ideology. And the kind of people brainwashed with Marxism are in no position to try to dictate the world's affairs. I think I'm pretty much at the end here, folks. So the ego, workers of all lands unite. So the ego is a big problem, that's what drives a lot of this, is people thinking they know what's best, but they don't. But there's so much more we can say about that. I think I'm at the end. Yeah, that's the last slide. So anyway, folks, I think I'm going to leave it there because it's getting quite late. I want to grab a late supper. But thanks for watching. If anyone is still listening, I'd highly recommend you check out the first video, which is the pinned tweet on my X profile. It's about 56 minutes long for the presentation only, and about an hour and 40 minutes for the whole thing if you want to watch the Q&A. There's also the you can find the YouTube version here on YouTube as well. And what else? My website is resolvingor.com. And so resolving R for Romeo, just the letter R, so R for Romeo, resolvingor.com. And there's a page there about the book Red Pandemic, The Global Marxist Cult. I would urge you to grab a copy. You can grab a copy on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, depending on where you are in the world. If you're in Ireland, the UK, or Western Europe or whatever, you could just order straight from the publisher, Omnia Veritas. But all the links are on my website, resolvingor.com. So anyone listening back, watching this back, do us a favor and share these around just to kind of reach as many people as possible. I know everyone's a lot of people are too busy to read the book or lazy or whatever, but the presentations do a lot to at least give some more knowledge and get the message out there. Because remember that the more we understand Marxism, the more we can suppress it, the more we can oppose globalism, the more we can allow patriotism to rise and stop all this degeneracy and save our countries. So I consider this stuff as being like a training course for patriots or anti-globalists or nationalists, whatever you want, or libertarians, whatever you want to call yourself. This is a training course to bring people up to speed on this ideology, because whoever you are, whatever you believe in, if you have a conscience, opposing Marxism should be on your to-do list, shall we say. But thank you very much, folks, and thanks for your support, Lamb Chop, as well. Just losing my voice. Shit, perfect timing. But yeah, thanks very much for watching, folks, and thanks for the sound checks and so on earlier. So I'm going to end the stream here, but I'll probably do another one soon. But thanks very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you very much. Thank you.